Welcome everybody to the Agile Austin Leaders Special Interest Group. And folks, as I said, we are recording this session. We are going to place this on our YouTube channel. By all means, if you would not like to be recorded, feel free to go on mute, turn off your camera. It will be as if you were never here. Change your name too, to make sure for that. Introductions very quick before we transition on to Erik, our guest speaker for today. Max Akesi, I'm here in Austin, Texas. I am an IT senior manager at PayPal. I've been leading, facilitating, serving within Agile transformations for 12 plus years. And I helped co-found this special interest group back in 2010. And what we do is we always bring a guest speaker here. We have discussions where we're interactive all around leading Agile transformations. That can take a lot of variety of shapes. We're here first Friday of every month. We are part of the larger Agile Austin umbrella. So by all means, I'll just say very quickly, agileaustin.org. Check out our site. It's very informative. We've got a bunch of stuff there about what it means and the benefits of being a member, of being a sponsor, etc., etc. Again, agileaustin.org. I'll drop that in the chat also afterwards. And shout out always to our sponsors. Shout out to our sponsors. We're getting more and more sponsors. We redid our site. We're starting to get into a lot more branding as we become a really global organization with paying members all around the world. I mean, it's $35 a year, and it's just incredible that where we started off in 2007 and where we are now, it's just been such a journey. Folks, the best that I can say is just subscribe for free to our meetup page. And just to make it even easier, I will put here the link to it so that when you subscribe to the meetup page, what happens is that we have about 6 to 7 meetup sessions every month. Whether you're interested more in coaching SIG or scaled Agile framework SIG, Scrum SIG specifically, lean Kanban discussions. People just show up and you just prioritize stuff you want to talk about in Agile and you just sit and talk. I mean, the book club, it's all there. And what we've done in the last year that has been pretty awesome, it took us a while to catch up. We've got our own YouTube channel. We're going viral, folks. Yes, I'm going to post Erik and this whole presentation at some point in the next 24 hours. And people that are not here, click on it, and there you go. Subscribe to it, right? That's what helps the most. Very quickly, the board. I'm actually also the president of Agile Austin. I've been on the board for a few years and happy to look forward to another year. We're going through elections, so I should be able to make it because nobody else is going to run against me. So you know what? I'm confident about this, folks. In May, we got the election. So, but that's going to be my last year. I'm doing a 2-year term, but it's just been incredible to be a member of the organization for 12 years. Very quickly, we've got like a good lineup coming up in the next few months. Don't want to go into too much of the details, but I just want to do a shout out real quick to Elliot Kimber is going to talk to us about being agile prior to the manifesto, because like he's done so much stuff, not just in the tech world. He was one of the co-founders of the XML standards and various technologies, but he actually talks about what it was like in the 70s and the 80s and things that actually continued and improved from an agile perspective and things that actually did not improve, because when certain things go very mainstream, there are consequences too also sometimes. So I think it's awesome to hear that. July 4th, we're taking off, okay, because it's right by the 4th. And then we'll come back in August to have Ned talk about some other prioritizing portfolio stuff. As you can see, we've got Erik that's going to talk to us about portfolio stuff today. Ned also in August. We're trying to definitely bring a lot of focus to the portfolio side of things. Okay, so I will drop in there the link for the June SIG soon. But folks, why don't we just go ahead and get started? And I'd like to say thank you for Erik Cottrell to come and talk to us about why portfolio management matters even more now. Clarity, focus, and validating value. Round of applause for Erik, please. Yay. It's much harder on Zoom, Erik.
Yeah, well, I haven't earned anything yet, so you can hold your applause to the end for sure. Thank you all for having me, Max. I'm excited to talk to you today. Some of you may have actually heard us jabbering at the outset, and Max, you said something I think is important, that some people look at agile transformations and the result leaves a bitter taste in their mouth.
Very much so.
I think what we're about to talk about could do the same thing. And I want to make sure that you at least get my flavor and my perspective of what I'm seeing in the market, what I believe is happening around portfolio management, or you could call it lean portfolio management. The important part is that it is becoming a critical component for enterprises to adopt and think about and wrestle with. And it is not a simple topic. So I'm going to try and simplify some things today. And that's why I've broken it down into 3 things: clarity, focus, and validation. Those 3 things are core to it. And I'm seeing a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders struggling. But as we get started, I'd like to start out with some ground rules, some working agreements. Today, as I go through, you'll find I will give you my honest view of things. And so the first thing I look for when I'm interacting with folks and building teams is honesty, which is your version of the truth. And so we'll have time for you to ask questions. And if you disagree with me because your version of the truth is different than mine, that's great, because it's going to be through a collective understanding that we're going to get better. So honesty is the first thing you can expect from me. Second thing is candor. So candor can mean a lot. And sometimes it means we say things and we don't quite say them exactly right, but we stick with it to get to the main point so that we can understand each other. So honesty and candor, and sometimes candor can also mean some salty language, which I will avoid because this is recorded. And then lastly, after honesty, candor, it's respect. If you do have a question and you raise your hand using the reactions tool in Zoom, or if you just wave your hands at me, we'll try and catch you. But if you don't feel like you're not getting my attention, say something out loud so that you can interrupt me and we'll go from there. I do want to try and get through all the content, but I also want to make sure that we're having a good conversation. And at the end, we'll have Q&A, and we can go back and look at anything in more detail, because as you can imagine, this has some depth to it. We're not intending to solve at a detailed level. I would say we're kind of looking at all we're looking at an oil field, and we're trying to figure out where are we going to put the oil wells. We're not necessarily going to be drilling for oil today. And so if that's okay with you, we'll start there and then figure out kind of what's up with portfolio management in the world today. All right. I also have a Miro board, and in the chat, you are more than welcome to join me there. But I'll be working through the Miro board. I'm going to share my screen here in Zoom as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's do a quick check-in.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Is anybody having any troubles, any issues before we get started, so we can make sure you're good?
We're good.
All right. So in respect for your time, as one of the core values, I want to make sure I'm going through this in a fairly quick fashion. But what I'm seeing is that we're in this sort of a fight for our lives. And if you've seen this video, I won't play it for you. It's really only a minute 40, but you've probably seen, this famous episode in I Love Lucy where they are assigned this task of having to wrap chocolates, and things start off kind of nice and they're like, hey, this is great, we can do this. And then all of a sudden the conveyor belt speeds up, right? And it goes faster and faster. And Lucy, at about a minute in, she asks a question. She says, hey, Ethel, does it seem like we're fighting a losing game? And as I talk to leaders and I talk to teams, it feels like everybody's kind of feeling like they're behind. They're on that conveyor belt where things are coming at them so fast that they already feel like they've lost the game. And they're playing and they're trying to keep up, but they're struggling. And that's not just true for the teams, it's also true for the leaders. And the leaders have an exceptional pressure where they're trying to do what this woman does, their boss. She actually has to try to speed up the assembly line, right? She has to move the conveyor belt faster because in this case, they have more pressure than ever before to go really fast. And I don't know where people are coming from today. I'm sort of thinking the audience is folks who are trying to implement agile practices, of which lean portfolio management is one. And the other would be leaders, people who are trying to figure out, how do I make sense of all this stuff? But in both cases, I think we share this common understanding. We all feel overwhelmed. And trying to make sense of how do we manage all of it is really crucial going forward. And that's where I do think we can learn something about where we've come from and where we're going. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with Mick Kirsten's book, Project to Product. It's very popular. It's sort of a seminal work around understanding how we are changing our mindset from being project-driven to being value-driven through products. And I come from the world of products. So I started my career at a startup in the Bay Area in software. And then I went to Adobe Systems where I worked, had a blast, and then ended up at Schwab for 10 years and ran product there. So I come from the product world. So I have a bias towards figuring out how are we implementing change and making it better. But I always felt that my pressure was I always had to pick the right thing. There's always more to do. And as soon as you got one thing done, it was obsolete. You got to come up with something new. I didn't really have time to kind of step back and think about the world in which I was living. And I think Agile has done a lot of good to help people orient, sense where they're at, and kind of understand that there's a huge dynamic that's taking place. And in this graphic, which is basically derived from Mick's book, he outlines these major epics, these events that an epic as an EPOCH, and we'll talk about different kinds of epics later, but different time periods that we as human beings have kind of figured out how to do work, right? And the first one that we talk about a lot is the Industrial Revolution. And then he talks about the age of steam and railways. And I won't go into all of that, but I think part of one of our challenges is that the conveyor belt represents sort of this industrial age, age of steam, age of railway mindset where things were fixed. We were dealing with iron ore, right? We were smelting, we were creating steel. We were working with entities and concepts that were actually fixed. And now that we're in the top level here in the age of software and the age of digital, nothing is set, right? I live down the street from SolarWinds, and I don't mean to cast aspersions, but a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I used to say I could throw a rock and hit SolarWinds, and people would say, hey, well, they've made my life a challenge, and I'm trying to figure out how to sort this out because the world is now so interconnected and so complex that our dependencies make the stuff that we work in not fixed. And so we have to have a different mindset. But when I was a product manager, I was just busting my butt to try to get to the next release. I wasn't thinking about this conceptual thing about, oh, I'm living in the age of software and that requires a different way of working. I was just scared to death that I wasn't picking the right feature set for my customer and that I was going to get, either praised or beaten up because I didn't pick the right stuff, right? And so I lived with that tension, but I didn't understand that my mindset needed to change. But what we ended up finding out was that we had set up, let me pull everybody to me here in Miro so you can see where I'm at. We built these ways of working that pretty much followed the lower rungs of our involvement with building stuff. And so we used things like assembly line thinking, and we use this notion, that our goal here is just to reduce the variability. Like if we could just strike any variability out of the system, we'll be good, right? And unfortunately, that is carried over today because we passed through where we had mainframes when things used to be like you had paper punch cards and things were still physical and they were still somewhat static. But unfortunately, Industrial Revolution, the early onset of the new age of software came along, and we used the same principles the same mindset, the same thinking back when we were building cars as the only thing we were doing, to now try to guide us in how we're working in this very different world. And so we're kind of set up for failure, frankly, because we're using systems and models that no longer serve us. So I won't spend a lot of time here, but I love this. I think this is one of the best reasons for adopting an agile approach. The new reality is that we wish things were true. And we sort of kind of operate based on this wish and this hope and this thinking. This is the way it is, right? Customers know what they want. Customers can tell us what they want, right? Developers know what they're doing, and so they're going to know how to build it. And then nothing's going to change out of that. Nothing's going to be different, AKA there's no variability. This is using industrial age thinking, right? Where things are fixed, it's easy to understand. We know what the output is going to be exactly, right? But the reality is that the things that we know to be true, and as a product guy, I experience this over and over again. You show the customer something that they asked for, and you did exactly what they asked for, and they said, that's not what I wanted. Or that doesn't look like I don't think I want that anymore. And you'd be like, what do I do? And so you're always dealing with this notion of discovery, right? So the customer is learning as they go. Meanwhile, as it turns out, so are the developers, the people that are building, right? They don't necessarily know exactly how they're going to get to the endpoint. And so they're discovering what needs to be true, and especially as the world around them is changing, right? And then the fact
Erik,
is, yeah.
Sorry, if I may say, this is so true, where you deliver exactly what was asked, and then they're like, well, that's not exactly, and they log a bug.
That's
and
right.
then the developers are like, well, that's not a bug. That was what I was, and there's all this triaging and everything around the bug, instead of saying, okay, it's not your need. Tell me more. Right. Tell me more. Like, but now we're stuck in timelines, and we delivered what you asked for, and because we were set up for failure.
That's right. Yeah. And it's not anybody's fault. Nobody is to blame. There's no judgment. In fact, there are sometimes, even in software, some facets that are really valuable in terms of being able, you can do some fixed stuff. So the reality is that I'm not arguing for one thing or another. I'm just saying this is what's true. And I've seen it and lived it. I mean, I was responsible for a very large, very visible, high impact software redesign. And I was literally scared to death that we were going to get it wrong, because it wasn't going to be like, oh, that was a bummer. It was gonna be like, that's going to leave a crater in our business, like material impact. And so, but I felt like I was constantly guessing, and we weren't operating. It was an agile project, but it wasn't an agile. It was agile and waterfall mixed together, and it was the worst of both. Terrible, horrible experience. And so we weren't able to give much of a preview. It was all, sort of canned stuff. And so we understand that the world has changed even more since I did that project, to now we're living in this world where companies are trying to figure out, well, how do we adopt agility, right? And their new reality has forced them to look at different tools, of which lean portfolio management is one. I see some questions coming in. Sherry, you just asked, we weren't able to give much of a preview. How do we adopt agility?
No, well,
actually, come back to.
I think that Sherry's taking more
just
notes.
Okay.
What he said.
Okay, great. Wasn't a question. Phew. Yeah. I was like, okay, we'll come back to that one.
Come back to that.
Because that's a whole other question. So there's this promise, and I'm not, if you can, do a show of hands on the reactions. I'm just curious how many people have heard of lean portfolio management, how many people are actually done it, how many people have implemented it. But it's got this big old promise, right? And here's where I'm going to absolutely take a hard right from sort of the standard approach. I'm a little bit of an anarchist when it comes to compliance and adherence. And so for me, when I try to describe this to executives, and so my job is to help executives figure out how are we going to lead in new ways to be able to achieve the benefits of agility. And so one of those things that I do is I try to put it into simple words, simple terms. And so the promise to me, if I were the leader, the promise of lean portfolio management and making sense of work through my system is this. And it reads like this. Our entire organization aims to know we're working on the right things at the right time, at the right pace, and we get the right results together, right? So the idea here is that it's the entire organization, right? We're aiming to know. It doesn't mean that we know. And that's the beautiful thing about agility, is that it doesn't require you to have all of the smarts at the outset. It allows you to go test and learn so that you can adapt and adjust. You need to be directionally aimed, right? But what our intention here is that we're working on the right things, right? So that when the client sees it, or the customer sees it, or whoever is using it, they say, okay, good, that's what I was expecting. At the right time, meaning, we have to work in a timely fashion, the right pace. That part is blown up for most companies because people are not working at the right pace. They're working at the loosey pace where stuff is flying by and they're not doing great work, and they know it. They don't feel good about it. They're working weekends, they're working long days. It's not sustainable. So it has to be a pace of business, but also a pace for humans. And then ultimately, and most importantly, it has to get the right results, right? But we're doing this all together. And so what I like to do, and if you're in the Miro board, you're more than welcome to play along. I wanted to show you one of the things that I would do, whether I'm working with teams or executives. I would say, okay, so if this is the promise for portfolio agility, where would you rate yourself today, right? Are you working on the right things? We never work on the right things. Well, and research, as you may have heard, has found that, probably north of 50, maybe 60% of anything that we build is wasteful anyway. People don't really use it. It's not very productive. And so maybe we don't always work on the right things. And so we would take these little circles here and we drag them out and say, well, maybe we're right in the middle, right? Like we're sort of smack dab. Are you working on things in the right time? No. We have 12 to 18 month schedules. Well, that's not necessarily the right time. How about the right pace? Well, people are working nights and weekends. I talked to a person who said they get one weekend day and they had one holiday day over the Thanksgiving through New Year's, one holiday day. So that's not the right pace. How about the right results? Well, we think we measure results, but we don't really measure results. So, and what I want us to do is I'm working with leaders to say, the goal here and the promise is that we should be able to do this. And the reality that I'm more concerned with, are you getting this kind of an outcome? Do you have this as part of your organization? And if you do, I'm going to get out of your hair. Like, I'm not going to bother you. Like, this is great. Like, good. If you're on the right-hand side, if you're trending towards the top quartile, we're mostly doing everything. Yeah, great. If you're moving towards, we're almost always on target. That's fantastic. Because it's more important to me that you're getting these outcomes, not that you're doing lean portfolio management. And we'll talk about one of the pitfalls that practitioners and implementers get into when it comes to lean portfolio management, because it is so complex and can be so difficult. All of a sudden, we get very rigid about implementing LPM. And we're not doing it according to SAFE's exact specifications. And we're not doing it exactly how I know we're supposed to. Well, right. That might happen. It's less important to me, are we doing the exact right LPM thing? And more, are we getting the outcomes that we want? Are we getting the results? So we deal with the fact that companies are where they are, but most of them are not working on the right things at the right time, at the right pace, getting the right results. And they know it. And that's why they feel like they're losing a little bit of a game here. So for me, and as we think about all of the tools, the meetings, the events, the roles, all of the things that go into portfolio management, and I'll pull you to me in Miro, it comes down to this. I think of this, and that's why I think it's so important. I believe that the portfolio management function in a company is the sense and respond mechanism. It's like the central nervous system, right? When you put your hand someplace where it's not supposed to be, your body automatically pulls it back. You are reacting to and responding to, sometimes you're moving fast, sometimes you're moving slow. But I think this function, the lean portfolio management, is the most important part of running a business. This is where mix comment between it's almost always the business and technology. And those need to be fused together because we need to be operating like dendrites react to one another very, very quickly, right? Like the nerve cells are designed to both sense and respond and react to change stimulus very, very quickly. We need to have that harmony between technology smarts, business smarts, and all of that together, because we need to be able to sense and respond to the change in our environment. One example of this is that when we were working for a large company here in Texas, COVID hit and it blew up their business model. They had some teams that were already down the path of adopting agility. It took them 2 to 4 weeks to stop the work that was in flight, start new work that came up as a result of what was happening in the market, and they began to start saving money. That's all they had to do. They didn't have to generate new revenue. They just had to start saving money. And in months, they started saving 5 million, 10 million, 15 million a month. And they were already down the path of being able to pivot, because it didn't take them long to switch, to stop what they were doing and start something new, because everybody was in that mindset and that they had the capability. But they were sitting right next door to other people in the exact same organization who were on 12-month and 18-month cadences. And so those teams had a terrible time trying to stop their current work, adopt new things, and go. They were stuck because they didn't have the capabilities. So lean portfolio management relies on the strengths and the capabilities that Agile brings, to be able to know that we only work in these small batches, small teams getting stuff done. They're easy to pivot and to twist. So in this case, as we think about having the clarity, oh my gosh, the world has changed. We need to change. So we're going to pivot. We are clear about what we are doing. And so portfolio management should be bringing clarity. Folks should know, from the CEO all the way to the person who just joined the company and started on a team writing code or doing some test automation or deploying, whatever their job is, whatever their function is. Everybody needs to know what needs to be done and why we need to do it. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. Then we need to be able to say, we are working on the most important things first. So this is where lean portfolio management gets really fun, because you tell people, no, we're not going to be able to do that right now. It's on our backlog, but we're going to be working on this priority first. We're focused on it. And I will say that what I am experiencing in business is that nobody likes to say the word no.
Bingo.
Right? So when you have clarity as to what matters most, then you can focus. And then here's the most important part. As a leader, you could be wrong. Your direction may not be 100% on course. So we need to validate that it's working in the market. We need to validate that it's working for our teams. And so we're going to validate and confirm that we're on the right track. And then, because we're working in agile ways, we're able to pivot quickly and adjust and course correct. So to me, at the outset, the promise of lean portfolio management, we are working on the right things at the right time, at the right pace, getting the right results, because we have clarity, focus, and validation. Okay, so they go together. And this is a video of slime mold. We won't watch that either, just because I'm looking at the time. We're not going to have time to watch it. But slime mold, it's actually quite clever. It goes out and it finds food, but it does it by just sort of random reaching out. It's just sort of, it's doing all the outreach all at the same time. So it's not very intelligent. It's quite clever in the fact that once it grabs onto food, it's very, very smart about what it does. But a lot of companies, and one of the coaches I talked to, he said, I'm amazed at how many companies run in kind of the slime mode approach, which is, we're just going to do all the things. We're not going to say no to any of them. And we're hoping that some of them will become nutritious, and then we'll keep going down that path. Oh, but then we're going to keep pushing on all the other paths. The difference between companies and slime mold is the slime mold will kill off the parts that aren't returning nutrition. In business, we start stuff, we have a hard time stopping it, right? So we want to make sure that as we're thinking about this, that we have clarity of where we're headed, we have focus to be able to go do it, and then we're validating as we go along. So we can move quickly and have the kind of visibility that companies need to sense and respond and win to get the change they want. All right, that's a lot of me talking for now. Any questions or comments? I'll look at the chat. Okay.
Or folks would like to put up their virtual hands. Erik, I just wanted to say that whole piece of nobody likes to hear no, nobody likes it, we got to change. I think that is a place where a lot of communication, a lot of enhancements in how also the folks on the business, and I don't want to just dump it all, oh, are you folks in the business, but where the asks are coming from the portfolio space, if they could better communicate, yes, this is our annual portfolio, but we're going to be lean. We're going to understand that we got to change. So in the next 2 months, you'll get a new prioritized list from us based on feedback from customers and agencies we have to work with, whatever. But a lot of times I see this massive effort on an annual roadmap planning. People commit as if they sign their lives away, okay? And then there's no other communication that happens in like reprioritize portfolio or blah, blah, blah. I think that there's an opportunity for the communication from whomever's asking for a lot of this work to do that. Do you believe in that?
Oh, yeah, no. Well, so I think part of that is leaders are used, and this is where we can have some empathy for our leaders. They are running from a playbook that says iron ore shows up at our doorstep. We know how much iron ore to move to this location. And they're thinking we're using a model that says you can plan in 12 months, you can plan in 18 months, and it's okay because things aren't going to change that much. And it's really not their fault, because I think, frankly, leaders are completely underserved because they're just like I was when I was a product person, hammering up to write every release, taking a little bit of a breather, and then on to the next. Like, we're on this, that's why I started with the Lucy thing. We're on this race path that's very, very difficult. And Agile, the thing I liked about Agile when I first heard it was I didn't need to be perfectly right. I needed to be directionally right. And then I could go validate and test, and then we could increment. And I wasn't being compelled to say, this is our 12. I could just say, oh, for the next 3 sprints, oh, I can do that. And it doesn't feel as scary. So yes. And leaders actually take a breath and they're like, I don't have to be right. I don't have to be perfect in my choosing, right? So, and I'll close with this. The other thing is, because they're not sure that they're right, they stack a lot of work because they're guessing at the right outcome. And so they're saying, okay, the first bet might not be right, but I got number 2, number 3, number 4. So Max, go do 4 of these things and hopefully 1 will hit.
Oh, you are a lot more understanding towards the leaders than I am. I just think maybe I have a high expectation because they are very highly compensated, and that should be just part. I mean,
that's no measure.
Let's
we'll
go
talk
to the
about that
question.
in a second. I see somebody's got their hand raised, so let's.
Yeah, Anaga.
Naga.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can. Yep.
So very insightful talk, and can you say a little bit more about you compared portfolio management with the sense and response system to change or nervous system, and that's very interesting way of looking at things. Yeah. So can you say a little bit more about it?
Yeah. Let me talk through the functions, and you'll notice that I have not. For those of you who love all of the diagrams and pretty pictures and complex interactions, I don't have a lot of that. So, Anaga, tell me if this doesn't answer your question, but what I'm after more is, okay, so right thing, right time, right, all that stuff. Okay, great. Clarity, focus, and value. Great. All that stuff is there. Now, what needs to be true to make this nervous system work? Right? So what needs, and I like this notion of, what does a company need to do the thing, right? And what they need, I don't care if you adopt the official lean portfolio management that SAFe puts out, I don't care. And I get in a lot of trouble because some of my friends do care. I don't, because I'm a product guy. If you want to write it in ASCII, or you want to use COBOL, or you want to use Angular or some redact, I don't care. Like, you, whatever works. But we need to be clear about what those functions are and need to be in place so that we can be the nervous system in the company. And so the first thing is, and this is, Max, to your point about leaders, I tell them your function is the directing function. That means we have a strategy, measures, and narrative. So spoiler alert, most leaders are not good at strategy. They say, oh, strategy is our 5-year plan. And I say strategy has nothing to do with time. 0. So my point is, Max, and I think this is a really good one, sometimes our leaders are just really, really good at getting stuff done and they keep getting promoted up. It doesn't necessarily mean that the new functions that need to be in place that they are able to go do. But directing is squarely in their lap. They need to be able to provide the strategy and have it make sense. The measures, how do we know that we've arrived? And then what's the narrative? Tell me why I should care, right? So that's just, and there's
Very well said,
more, right? Yeah.
Very well
and,
put.
And
yeah.
most of them are like, I'll do that once. I'll do that in the town hall. And I'm like, nope, you are directing all the time. There's a great quote from the former LinkedIn CEO who said, when you're tired of saying it, they're just starting to hear it. So this narrative and the directing thing is different because leaders don't often take I'm going to point us in a direction. I'm not going to tell you how to get there. I'm not going to say exactly what it is because we're going to figure it out, but here's where we're headed, right? I haven't swam triathlons in a while, but I used to swim a lot of open water swims, and you swim buoy to buoy. You know that you're going to turn around eventually, but you have to sight to the next buoy, and then you swim and you sight again, and then you swim sight again, and you pray to God you can turn around as fast as you can, and you're tired, but you're still going, but you have to sight to the next thing. And sometimes that's the best leaders can do, but that's a skill that they oftentimes need to develop.
Nowadays, I just want to say, you've got to communicate in multiple manners via the Slack channel, in an all hands, via emails. It's continuous, like direction has to be laid out. Nobody should be unclear about it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And so the first thing, so going back, Naga, to your question, I would say, okay, does this organization have a directing function, and is it working? Is it functioning? Is it malfunctioning? Is it non-functioning? Is it dysfunctioning? Right? And then the second thing is investing. This is actually the hardest thing because accounting is driving our business. And Mick does a good job of describing this, but we have a tremendous hill to climb around budgeting. So budgeting does not fit today with this lean way of working. I should say maybe leaner way of working. So that's a function that needs to be in place. People need to know what they can count on from, being able to fund the work that's in flight. And then I won't go through all of these, but then road mapping, and Max, earlier you were talking about saying no. You'll notice that under sequencing, the first bullet is decision-making, right? I used to use a tic-tac-toe box, right? Nine different items. And I would say there's only one that we can do because that's all the capacity that we've got, right? So I'm saying 8 to no other thing. No, 8, nope, can't do those because we're doing this one thing and it should be the most important, right? So now, next, and later work, and we're placed, let's be honest, let's give our leaders a little bit of a break and our product people a little bit of a break. They're betting, they're taking some guesses. And they need to be more vulnerable and transparent with you all when they're doing that, but they don't know for sure either. And I've had other product people say, this is going to be the best thing ever. And I'm like, all right, good luck. And then they release it and they spent literally millions of dollars, and it was.
And I think that a lot of people can understand that can happen. And so it would be awesome that after things are delivered, the product folks and folks in business have this way of coming back with saying, here's what happened. Here were the clicks on the site. This is what the difference it made. And it could be good or bad, but it connects people doing the work with the outcome, right?
I was asked to come back to Schwab as a consultant and help on one of their not very well adopted products. And I made, this was way, that was pre-Agile from a manifesto perspective. And I put a Polycom phone, high technology at the time, in the middle of a table, and we called our 3 clients. And I had all the developers around the table, and I had 3 questions I asked them, right? And the customers got to talk directly to the developers. And by the time they were done, the developers were like, we completely missed the mark. We built this for somebody else, and where somebody else now is actually wanting it. And so they changed and I didn't even have to write requirements. It was the easiest, right? Because there was
no talk about stories and
they had passion to go fix it, right? And at the executive level, at the LPM level, we want that kind of, we're directed towards the customer experience. We're getting that feedback, and it's all that sort of affirmational thing. We're sequencing thing. We can't do all of it. But then there's on the technology side. So if you are in technology, there has to be delivery. And one of the things I would tell if you're listening, if you're in technology, if you're a delivery person or leading delivery teams, please figure out your capacity. Because lean portfolio management depends on a level flow of work. And if you don't know what your capacity is, that's not the business's fault. You need to own that, and you need to get your capacity figured out, stat, so that you can understand how much work you can handle, so you can decide how much you can sequence, how much you can roadmap, how much you can get to done with your partner in business's help. So then there's that validation piece. How many of you have ever released a product that said, we're going to generate $3 million more, and then all of a sudden it goes out the door and nobody measures a thing? We're going to have 25% adoption. Nobody measures a thing. We never go back, right? And so in this world with lean portfolio management, validation is everything, because it's all based on business results. And so that's how we're also going to get better value insight, so that our betting on the investing and road mapping and sequencing side gets better. We know what we're going to pause. We know what we're going to invest in more. We know what we're going to stop altogether. We know what we're going to retire, all because we are creating these feedback loops, which is number 7, learning. We need to make sure that we're getting insights all the time, not just data, but insights. And that happens at all levels of the portfolio, the executive level, at the team of team level, and at the team level. Morgan, I see your hand is up.
Hey, Eric.
Hey, happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday. I was curious about the measurement part. Would you when do you recommend coming up with those measures of success? During, after, especially if large companies are in like that slime mode and they're just going after everything?
Yeah, so you'll have to make trade-offs. There's no one answer. The question I would ask is, again, as I wouldn't be prescriptive, I'd say, okay, well, how are we going to learn? And so it would be a great conversation to say, all right, I don't know when exactly we need to figure out what's going on. Whenever you decide to measure, given your constraints and your challenges, is the right time. What I would say, though, is not measuring is not okay. And so you could try some experiments, try some very low drag, easy to measure things. Just make sure that the organization is ready to do that. And the other part I would say is try to make it as repeatable and reusable as possible. So if you're going to create measures, see if there isn't some way that you can create some that you can use over and over again, no matter what the feature or function that's put into the market is. So it's going to be a test and learn. I don't know that there's one great answer. What is necessary is for people to get better and to learn better, they're going to have something to look at to say we were on target or not. Otherwise, you're always just guessing, and now you're in slime mold mode. We're just pushing on all fronts, hoping that we get some nutrition from a value perspective.
And Eric, as you said, that validation to be able to measure things after you've delivered,
Yep.
That is so powerful. And so many times I see teams having to measure their velocity,
Yep.
their throughput, stuff like, but that value to
That's right.
remember the consumer, that's like awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And teams need to measure how they're performing, and but in this case, we're trying to figure out, at a higher level, what are we doing that's valuable? What's being perceived by our market as being valuable? And the reason for that is number 8, which is you can course correct, right? So you're able to adjust. You can change your feedback to get more clarity. You can also adjust your funding, and you can decide where to go. And it is okay to course correct. But Max, most leaders don't believe that's true, right? And we like to rewrite history and say, oh, when we started this company, we knew that baloney. Most companies evolve and twist and turn and change. They course correct, but we like to tell nicer stories for whatever reason, historical, psychological, egotistical reasons. And then finally is removing waste. How are we getting better? And that's why we don't work on a bunch of stuff. So it's 12:46. These are the functions, and you can see it down below. And if you're in Miro, you could, pull up, where do you think you're doing really well? And so I ask leaders and teams to just do red, yellow, green. And we won't spend a lot of time here, but where do you think you're doing really well? We're green. Where do you think you're yellow? We're not so good. We're sometimes good, sometimes not. Red, we are flat out not good. Like, we are not great at whatever. And so I always want to be able to test this, because if companies are already adopting this and they're already doing these things, then lean portfolio might be really easy to implement, or they might not need it, because I don't care if they implement it. Again, I care if these functions are working so that they can have, to Naga's question, so they can have that central nervous system. So Max, let's just use our conversation as an example. You're not expecting this, but Max, when we first met, when we first talked about me talking, you said, Erik, expect to talk about 45 minutes and then cut yourself off, right? And I was like, okay, so I'm always going to have more material than I'm going to want to cover. But what I want to be able to do is to know that I can cut at what I consider to be the highest value, right? And say, I think I've delivered some value. I know that I did not cover lean portfolio management from a step-by-step process. That's the next section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk over there and give you a tour. But what I care more about, so that we don't leave a bitter taste in people's mouths, so that we don't fail on this and very important lean portfolio and that initiative, we have to be clear on why it's important, not how we do it, not that we follow the letter of the law, but that we have the key functions operating at a high level, mostly greens, or some yellows, and hopefully not many reds in the thing that I'm sharing with my screen, that we're working on the right things at the right time, at the right pace, right? That we're delivering things because we have clarity and focus. Like, if we do those things, I don't care how you do it. I don't care how many meetings you have. I don't care what roles you establish. I care about, if those things are happening, you're going to get great results. So for me, I could cut us right here and say, I'm done. I'm not going to share anything more with you.
Absolutely.
And say, I think this is the most important component of lean portfolio management. Now, there is really good stuff coming up next, but Max, I'll defer to you and you let me know which way we want to go.
No, and Erik, I think you're spot on, because at least from what I've heard, it's like, yes. Now, I don't want to speak for everybody here in the session, but my big thing is, yes, this is great. And then it would be awesome to hear even just some experience you had about how a team was struggling. About a perfect one you did was the Charles Schwab one, right? About how people just heard from the customers and they were like, oh, I get it. Like, just some aha moments where it was just challenging and then it worked. But I think we might have a question.
Oh, okay.
Or two. Let me see. Maru said, hi, Erik. Could you at the very end share the YouTube link for the first one that you shared, the fighting a losing game?
Yeah, yes. And yes, I will make sure you get the link.
In the meetup post and everything, we can add all of the links. Yes.
Yep, I can do that.
Yeah. I just want to make sure. I know Ned put a couple of comments out there. Ned, if you want to share something in person aligned with your comments, always love to hear from you. If you can get up.
I'm trying to find my mute button here. I'm not
you're triple muted.
Technology.
Hopefully not anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's we were talking about when do you measure and so forth. And again, I really like the lean startup approach. I mean, we use this in development all the time. You don't start writing the code until you write the tests. And if you don't know how you're going to measure success, you got no business trying to do anything.
It's a hard.
Again, that's kind of the lean startup playbook, right? What do you believe is true about the customer? How would you know that was true?
Right.
Okay. I mean, we're going to take a stab at testing that hypothesis that something is of value to the customer. Well, how are you going to know? And if you can't answer the question, how are you going to know? You get no question. You can't go out and ask a question. Yeah. Because you won't know what to do. Right. You will not learn from your success or your failure if you don't know how to measure the outcome.
And if I could, Ned, so in the spirit of candor, right? So
Sure.
imagine, let's play this out. I'm the product person, and Ned, you came to me and said, okay, so what's going to be true? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I know I should be doing this, but I don't know exactly how to answer this question. I now feel bad. I am kind of politically worried. Are you know, and my point is that that's where the empathy can come in, is that you're right, Ned. Somebody's looking ahead. So I'll remove that. So,
see, this is the discipline. I talked about blaming the salesperson earlier,
right?
But there are companies where the salespeople take orders.
Yep.
And the PO assembles the orders and collates them and prioritizes them and says, here are the orders. Now go build this. And no one has ever stopped to actually say, what is the impact on customer satisfaction? What is the impact on revenue? What is the impact on our total profit of doing this particular activity? We're just taking orders and fulfilling orders. And that can be successful if the customer was right. But as you pointed out in your first slide, the customer doesn't know what they want.
Not always.
So you better be able to deliver something early to discover if the customer really understood what they wanted and is going to benefit from things.
In the same way that we can do that, so the business people, sales people, and others can just go do things. Marketing people can just go do things. They're doing the marketing things. They're doing the sales things.
Sure.
My concern for this group is I don't want you just to go in and do lean portfolio things. I want you to know why they matter. And so in this next slide, I'll pull you all to me. People are already kind of clicking around. You know, there's a 30,000 foot view, right? But what I would say that, you kind of have a flow of portfolio management. When you start off with, to your point, Ned, we have clear strategic investments.
Sure.
We know why we're going to invest in this, right? And so we move that out of the way. And we would say, oh, we're working on our culture. We're working on our core competencies. We're working on opportunities. We're dealing with threats, right? So our strategy is tuned towards making sure that we're going to be a healthy company. Awesome. But the first question we're asking ourselves is, are we clear about our strategic investments? The next question, what are we going to work on right now? What are we going to work on next? And what are we going to work on later, right? And this is where the examination, Max, that you talked about saying no. This is at the highest level. We call this the epics. And if there was more time, we would go into that. But this is at the sort of the corporate view, right? We should be clear at the corporate view as to what the most important corporate initiatives are, because that sequencing and that decision-making starts there. And leaders have to have the right incentives that, oh, if my organization's not going to get funded, but Ned's is, because Ned's in the hotspot based on the COVID and work from home stuff, I have to be comfortable that I'm going to have a reduced funding this year for the foreseeable future. So how do I help Ned? Right? What do I do to offer him my team's support, my team's time, so that we can work through the most valuable things around our new corporate environment? Erik, but that's crazy talk, right?
That's crazy talk to a lot of, that's like really radical thinking when you think about some of our organizational hierarchy structure, et cetera, et cetera. But what you just said here, setting that focus, I like to always go to focus, because it's incredible how in my organization, we have 20 plus teams, and at any time we're saying, here are the 4 top priorities for the organization. We've got a lot of people that could do work on those 4 top priorities. They're doing work on other stuff. How does it happen? How does it happen? And, we're communicating and we're recommunicating, and random work comes in from the product folks. And I don't want to blame the product folks. Maybe I'll just do what Ned did. I'll blame the salespeople. I don't know, but it's not the salespeople. We don't have salespeople that are selling our, but we got this is like product and engineering not able to get on the same page. Imagine if we had a better culture of prioritizing the focus at the chief executive tier or the VP tier, and we're talking to large enterprises here, obviously, right? But there's
another coach friend of mine said the issue is here. There's a gap between PowerPoint at the executive level and Jira at the implementation level. And that's where the gears crunch, right? Because to your point, somebody somewhere is probably acting from an empowered perspective. Like, my customer needs this. They're not doing a bad thing in a vacuum, but they are not working on the most valuable thing. So we're not working on the right thing at the right time. that might be the right thing, but it's not the right time. And we need to have conversations. And what people need to understand is the company's results, our overall achievement is better than our individual achievement. That's another crazy town thought, right? Because many of our incentives are built around my personal bonus structure, right?
Mhm.
And that's why it's so important to go back to the beginning. We want to do this together, right things, right time, right play, right, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And if we can, that's why that leadership, the directing function needs to be in place. This whole thing falls apart without direction, without strategy, right? Without objectives and measures. So
yeah,
let me just
and I
close
think that's an awesome closing like that.
All
Like
right.
without that leading strategy, it all falls apart. Right now,
That's right.
there's a lot to do.
You just created an ad for my talk that's coming up in a couple of months, Max.
There you go.
There you go.
That's what I'm focusing on.
Portfolio strategy, right?
Exactly.
And having to do that. No, I think.
All right. So
I think this is great.
I'll close down here and
wrap it up.
yeah.
Right?
Happy to do round two if you want, but there's a lot more to cover here. And now it gets in the details. So somebody's moving stuff around to get into the specifics, but Max and folks who joined, thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm obviously passionate about this, and I hope it was helpful for you. We'll share the Miro for you if you want to get in touch at the very, very end. Feel free to leave your name and email, and I'll send you specific things or answer any specific questions. But I'll shut up, Max. It's all yours.
Hey, round of applause for Erik. Hey, no, and Erik, to your point, yes, we would like you to come back because we need to keep on hearing about things from a product perspective. And of course, you spoke about it from a leadership perspective, a product perspective, a customer perspective also would be awesome to hear how to measure, validate customer value.
Oh, yeah.
I think that is like, that's a whole talk in itself.
Oh, there's so much here.
There's so much, and I think that we Agilists geek out a lot on Jira and on our stories and epics and our value streaming and a lot of these things. And then it's like, okay, that's great, but what are we doing to move the needle when it comes to like customer value, which is the most important thing? And we sometimes just don't measure it at all. And we have tools now. I mean, if it was 20 years ago, you might have an excuse, but we have so many tools now, like to measure, especially when we're talking software.
Yeah.
There's no reason to not integrate that more into, get that feedback very quickly, put it into your planning sessions, do it in like an iterative way, just continuously. But hey, that'll be for another time. So Erik, we will be expecting you back to talk to us more about that.
Sure. Good luck.
Hey, folks, thanks for coming out. I put the link to the SIG in June out there. As we said, we're going to be off in July. Happy July. And then we'll be back in August with Ned, actually. But we will be posting, the YouTube out on the weekend. And Erik, all the links and everything I'll make sure to get from you, but we're going to post that on the meetup. So if you signed up for this session, you will be getting all the communications on the meetup. Okay. Thanks for coming out. We start on time. We end on time. Have a good Friday and weekend, folks. Cheers.